what's up, everybody? This is Mark Schipper, Fifth Down College Football. We're trying something a little new today. As you can see on the screen, that is the great Joey Harrington, the Oregon Ducks quarterback from 2001 was his senior year. And I contacted him very late. He was extremely gracious to come on and chat with me. And here we are. So we're going to call this the Fifth Down Zoomcast. And we're just going to talk with Joey a little bit about college football and what it means. And of course, the Oregon-Washington rivalry, which is what brings me to the Pacific Northwest. I want this rivalry to tell the story of college football in this part of the country, which is one of my favorites and has been since I was a kid. So, Joey, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. You sounds like a fun project you got going.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. Joey, for those who might not know, he had kind of one of those magical college football careers. When you look at Oregon today and the national competition and the uniforms and the revamped Autzen Stadium, that kind of began with Joey's class and the 2001 team. You could go back to 95, of course, in the big upset, but this was kind of when it was determined this would continue on. So, 2001, they finished number 2 in the rankings. They smoked a good Colorado team in the Fiesta Bowl, in the process, destroying my shaky faith in the BCS. But we're going to get back to that shortly. So let's start with the most important thing, Joey, which is uniforms. 1999, I believe that was when Oregon kind of decided to make the radical change. You were there for it. So my first question is, what are your thoughts on what I'd call the classical Oregon uniform, the yellow helmet, the interlocked UO, the green jerseys, and what I knew Oregon as a kid growing up? What do you think of those uniforms?
I loved them. I mean, as someone who grew up in Oregon, that was part of my childhood. I mean, that was, I was going to say that was what we saw on Saturdays, but in reality, we didn't see a whole lot of Oregon football because, remember there was only one game on TV and very rarely did the Ducks make television. So, in all honesty, my favorite combination was the yellow helmet, the white jersey, and the green pants. Yeah. That was the perfect combination of those. We call them retro now, right? Like we've actually had a revamp of those uniforms. So I think they're technically retro, but that was my favorite combination of all of them. But that was my childhood right there. That was it. Yeah,
that's how I grew up in the Midwest, born in Iowa City, grew up west of Minneapolis. And so we almost never saw Oregon on TV, the Civil War, maybe the Washington game, maybe. But my dad had old college football magazines, preview magazines lying around. And I remember seeing like Bill Musgrave from '87 in the Oregon uniform. And then it got in the early 90s. I loved those Oregon uniforms. Your combination was fantastic when they added the green pants, like mid 90s. And I thought they looked great, but we've moved on. We're now like old guys talking about uniforms right now. So my question, I guess, is what the Ducks are doing now. They've really pushed a new they're leading this in college football. Nationally, we're seeing new uniforms all over the place. So for Oregon as a football program, what do you think this new era of uniforms has meant to them and where they are now?
I don't want to turn this into a bigger conversation than I'm sure the question was. But the uniforms themselves and what they've turned into now are truly just like a piece of the Oregon football puzzle, right? You mentioned it, and I'll go back a little bit. You mentioned Bill Musgrave.
Yeah.
That was truly when things started, when let's lay the foundation, right? If here is where Oregon is right now, and the uniforms kind of come in somewhere around here. It all started with Bill Musgrave back in, he came in 86, 87. And he took them to their first bowl game in, 173 years, it seemed like. And, the Independence Bowl in Shreveport, and you'd have thought the entire state hopped in the car and drove down to Shreveport, Louisiana for that bowl game. And it was such a monumental thing. Yeah. And then there was the Freedom Bowl right afterwards. But those two games turned into the recruiting classes that brought in the Kenny Wheatons and the Ricky Whittles and the Dino Filias and the, go through the list of those, of that 94 Rose Bowl team. That became Kenny Wheaton. That was what was the, kind of the next step in Oregon football, which was the pick against Washington, which was really the kind of the turning point of the program. Those games, 94, 95 Rose Bowl, Cotton Bowl, became the recruiting classes that I was a part of, right? That turned into the stretch from 99 to 01, where we went 9 wins, 10 wins, 11 wins, and really jumped onto the national scene, and people started paying attention to us. That was the opportunity where the uniforms came in, right? So that once we had the eyes of the country, once people were actually starting to pay attention to the little guys out west, they changed up the uniforms and threw me on a billboard in New York City. So now the entire country is watching. And now it's not just the college football fans, the true diehard, dads who are, middle-aged and have kids playing Pop Warner on the weekends, but they started thinking about the kids, the next generation, the next recruiting class. And how do you bring them in? If you're a kid in Florida, you're a kid in Texas, you don't care that Oregon beat Washington. You don't care that Oregon beat Oregon State. That doesn't resonate with you, right? Because you're sitting there watching, Texas, Oklahoma, or you're watching Florida, Georgia, whoever it is. But what does catch your eye is a flashy uniform, is something different, is something outside the box. And that's where those uniforms came in, right? Once we'd laid the foundation, once we'd brought in a couple recruiting classes and grabbed the attention of the country, now it became, what do you do to keep it? And so those uniforms caught the attention of the 10, 11, 12-year-olds, who then became the next recruitable class that became the recruiting class that went to the 2010 BCS national championship game against Auburn, right? And that national championship game appearance became the Marcus Mariota recruiting class, which became the next appearance in the championship game, right? All of these, we'll call them stepping stones. Were very, they were on purpose, right? This wasn't just hey, let's get some new uniforms. Why not? There was thought that went into it. There was a reason. And and here's the kicker, right? In all these steps, whether it was putting me on a billboard in New York, whether it was going with flashy uniforms, all these things they made a splash. But they all would have fallen flat had the team not performed. Right? Had we gone 6-5 in 2001, people would be looking back at that billboard and say, boy, that was the biggest waste of money. How stupid was it? But but it wasn't. We went 11-1 and I ended up as a Heisman finalist. The uniforms start coming out and all the kids, start loving Oregon, and Oregon becomes a national brand. But if we would have fallen flat and didn't go to the BCS championship game, or Marcus didn't win the Heisman, then you look back and say, God, that was just a stupid way to draw attention, and they're no better than they were. And so while the uniforms, here's, let's tie up my long answer. Like I said, this is kind of a bigger picture thing. The uniforms are part of it, right? And they've evolved into something that has become kind of part of the Oregon identity. But had Oregon not played well enough, or had they not excelled? Let's put it that way. What is it? I saw a stat in the last 20 years, I think, Oregon has twice as many conference championships as Washington has wins against Oregon, right? We have 8 conference championships. Let's call it 8 conference championships since we started going with these uniforms. And that's something, right? There aren't too many. There aren't too many programs out there that can say they've won the conference championship just about every other year. And so while there is a flash and there is a novelty to them, it's been backed up on the field, which has allowed them to continue to do it.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer, actually. And that is what it's about and what people need to understand about why Oregon does that and how conscious an effort it was. I don't have all the details. You obviously know much more, but I know that Nike re-involved themselves with the program in the years after that Rose Bowl, the 94 team, 95 Rose Bowl. By the way, I think I said 95 Washington game earlier. 94, I know that. Don't get all over me, whoever watches this. It was the 94 game to pick, I know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's an absolutely brilliant answer. So I guess my question for you, just quick follow-up on that, is you said you liked the old uniforms. That's what you grew up with. When they hit you in 99, you walked into the locker room, you got those crazy new uniforms. What were your initial thoughts when they told you to pop those babies on? Did you like them?
Yeah, I loved it. I did. It was because you got to remember when Elway won his 2 Super Bowls.
Yep.
At the end of his career.
Yep.
It was after the Broncos had switched.
Yeah.
They had switched to those new uniforms. And that was a pretty big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Ours, I remember people saying, that they somewhat looked like that a little bit, or kind of had that feel to them. And so I was happy, hey, Elway just went out and won 2 Super Bowls in those uniforms and everybody liked them. So heck, we got some new uniforms now too. So it was great. We loved it. But even though we got a new uniform design, we still had a home uniform and an away uniform, right? It wasn't a week to week to week, chrome to a carbon to a lightning to a, those ugly highlighter, things to the wings to the diamond plate. I mean, you can go year to year and they've had some crazy stuff, but we still just had, kind of the biggest thing for us was the helmets, that iridescent, because the way they framed it was, and I don't know if you've ever seen them up close. Those helmets were an iridescent green, but it was modeled after an actual mallard duck.
Oh, yeah.
As you see the water come off of the mallard, it kind of changes color. And there's not quite a purple, but there is like this different color that hits it as the light and the water hits it. So that's what our helmets were, which was really the coolest part of those original uniforms.
Yeah, that's a fascinating detail with the mallard. Yeah, the duck's feathers, mallards particularly famously, as they shift in water and sun, take on a different hue. That's a really cool paint job. Yeah, they definitely were thinking this stuff out. All right, now that we got past the important stuff, let's go into some of the secondary issues here.
Like football.
Yeah, that uniforms here, everything else just somewhere beneath. I mentioned the 2001 team earlier. You've talked about them. That season and the BCS, really, I had a shaky faith in the BCS. I was like a weirdo child traditionalist. Like, imagine like a 9-year-old saying he liked traditional college football. It's like a weird thing to say.
It's me.
Yeah, you were one too. There are dozens of us out there, Joey. So when the BCS came in and it started to become a championship or bust sport, things were changing. And then 2001 came along. And just for people, if you want to go look this up, Nebraska famously got throttled by Colorado, their rival, to end the season, an absolute beating in Boulder. Colorado put 62 points on them, I believe. Nebraska didn't play for a conference championship. Oregon, Pac-10 champs, 1 loss, upset to Stanford midway late through the year. Nebraska gets the nod over Oregon, gets to go to the Rose Bowl, which also is why Oregon belonged there as Pac-10 champs. They go to the Rose Bowl, and they should have had the opportunity to play the University of Miami for the national title, come what may from that game. How did you guys handle that devastation? Or maybe not, I shouldn't say devastation. How did you guys handle that news as a team? And hopefully it was better than I handled it. I penned an angry screed about the BCS and was pretty upset about it.
Yeah. What's your is it FCC? Where do you fall on like the spectrum? What are we allowed to say on your show here?
Say whatever you want, Joey. Go right ahead.
Yeah, we were. I'll keep it somewhat tame. We were pissed. I mean, there wasn't. I could use a lot of other adjectives that were thrown around, but that was. It made no sense. Right. For the reasons that you mentioned, the 4 teams that were essentially considered, Miami, Oregon, Nebraska, and Colorado. Colorado had 2 losses, but they won, the Big 12 championship.
Yep.
They, like you mentioned, had destroyed Nebraska previously, or the previous week, and Nebraska did not play for, or not win or play for their conference championship because of it.
Right.
But what happened is all of these other polls, all these other voters, which the majority of which were based out on the East Coast, factored into the formula that the computer then went beep, beep, boop, boop, boop. Here's your two teams.
Yeah.
And because so many of the voters didn't get a chance to see us on a regular basis, or we didn't beat people by enough, that was kind of our thing, is, we were the comeback kids. We had 10 fourth quarter comebacks through through my career there. We weren't pretty enough. And, that year when Eric Crouch won the Heisman, and, Nebraska was the college football tradition, and they ended up getting the computer vote over the top of us.
Yeah.
It made no sense. And I'll be honest, like, there was a good week where I was furious.
Yeah.
But what it did is it turned into motivation and the outside chance, because we'll take a step back here. So during that time, there was the AP poll and there was the coaches poll. And then they had all these other polls that, factored into the BCS formula, right? But the AP poll was the one that factored in with all the others. The coaches poll was its own separate entity.
Yeah.
And so there's still existed because we were ranked ahead of Nebraska in the coaches poll. We were number 2 in the coaches poll. And I believe they were either number 3 or number 4. There still existed the outside chance that if Nebraska beat Miami in the BCS championship game and we beat Colorado, that Nebraska could win the BCS championship and we would win the coaches championship, right? There were a few years with, like, I know Washington had a split championship, and Colorado and Georgia Tech, and there were split championships for that, AP and coaches. So there still existed the opportunity that we could win the game against Colorado, win the coaches poll, should Nebraska beat Miami.
Right.
And so that was motivation for us to truly go out and stomp Colorado. I mean, to truly show everybody that we were the ones that deserved to be in that game against Miami.
Yeah.
As we all know, Miami destroyed Nebraska. It wasn't even a close game. And we finished number 2 in all the polls. I've been asked the question a lot of times. Would you trade the Fiesta Bowl win for an opportunity to play Miami in that championship game?
Yeah.
And you have to look at it in the context of what, like we talked about earlier, the stepping stones of the program, right? Yeah. It's almost like being left out of that game was better for and then stomping on Colorado was better for our national brand.
Yeah.
Than anything else that could have happened, right? Because what happened is the rest of the country saw we'll call it an injustice, for lack of a better word, that happened because of a computer formula.
Right.
And so they were all rooting for us. They were all saying we should have been there.
Yeah.
And then we went out and destroyed Colorado and solidified that for the rest of the country. And the rest of the country almost kind of became de facto, is it de facto?
Yeah, that works.
De facto Oregon fans because of that. So we were actually able to build our brand, to then go on the uniform trajectory, to then go out and recruit places like Texas and Florida and Pennsylvania, places we'd never been able to go before. So there was a huge advantage for us long-term for actually because we were actually left out of that game and then did what we did against Colorado. Yeah. And you also have to remember that Miami team, and I will argue that was the greatest football team in the history of college football.
Yeah, good.
And that was Clinton Portis, who was backed up by Willis McGahee, who was backed up by Jarrett Payton. All of the three only got to play because Frank Gore tore his ACL in camp. That was Ken Dorsey backed up by Brock Berlin. That was Jeremy Shockey backed up by Kellen Winslow, backed up by Buck Ortega.
Right.
That was Bryant McKinney backed up by Joaquin Gonzalez. That was Jonathan Vilma. That was DJ Williams. That was Jerome McDougal backed up by Vince Wilfork. That was Antrell Roll and Jonathan Joseph. And that was that was Ed Reed backed up by Sean Taylor. I mean, I'm forgetting a couple of those corners, but like Mike Rumpf, literally they had more first round picks on that team than we had NFL players on our entire roster.
Yeah.
But as shown by the next year when Craig Krenzel and Ohio State went out and beat them, all it takes is one game.
Yeah.
One game.
Yep.
And I would have loved to have that one opportunity.
Yeah, that's I'm glad you asked yourself that question, because I would have probably asked that. That's a great response there. Yeah, and there's some kind of just fascinating college football things wrapped up into that. When you say that may have been better for your program, that Colorado team, I would argue, was the hottest in the country at that time, coming off the beating of Nebraska. And then Texas had a good team. Colorado clobbered them in the Big 12 championship game. So Colorado, there hadn't been a 2-loss BCS team at that time. Colorado got real consideration. That's how hot they were. So when Oregon in the Fiesta Bowl, I mean, that game wasn't even close. It was all Ducks from wire to wire. It was a big statement about Oregon football and about the BCS and the mistake they had made. And you're right. I think people kind of said we may have been wrong about how good this Oregon team actually was. And that helped Oregon continue to generate momentum for their program. It's also interesting because we were talking about traditionalism earlier. It used to be in college football, you wanted to win your conference and go to a bowl game, hopefully in a warm weather spot, and enjoy with your fans. It was afterwards, they took a meaningful but meaningless vote on a mythical national champion. One team or two teams, if they split it, got to buy some rings for each other. And it wasn't the be all and end all. So Oregon going to the Fiesta Bowl and having that season, that's a magical fall for you and your fans. And that's extremely memorable. And that's kind of what college football used to be built on. We're moving into playoff and a more Super Bowl feel. But for that time, that was kind of a little bit of the last of how it was. And the way you described that to me is that's kind of what jumped out at me. It's a classic college football season there.
Yeah, the irony in that whole situation there is, with the BCS setup, and like you talked about bowl games and conference championships, they rotated the BCS championship through the four major bowl games, right? Through Orange, Fiesta, Sugar, and Rose.
Right.
And that year, the Rose Bowl hosted the BCS championship game.
Right.
We had won the conference championship in back-to-back years. We shared it with Oregon State and Washington the previous year, and then won it outright. So my junior year we shared it. Senior year we won it outright. My junior year we lost out on the Rose Bowl to a tiebreak, and Washington ended up going to the Rose Bowl. And senior year lost out on it to the BCS. And so I could be mistaken, but I've done a little bit of research on this, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong. We're the only team in the history of the Pac-12, 10, 8 conference to win back-to-back bowl games or back-to-back conference championships and never go to the Rose Bowl.
Yeah, I don't have the research on that, but that sounds right. Back in the day, you may have not been able to go back-to-back years, but certainly that following year, if you won it again, you would have gone. And so that, that was another frustrating thing about it, as you're talking about traditionalism. Pac-10 champion goes to the Rose Bowl. And
that's what I grew up watching. That's what everybody on the West Coast grew up watching. It wasn't, I'll say it was about a national championship. I mean, there was always, you knew the national championship existed, but it was about January 1st, and it was about Big Ten and Pac-10. And that's what we all grew up watching. It was Keith Jackson and the granddaddy of them all. And, that was the pinnacle for all of us. So to miss out on it twice, that was a tough one for an Oregon kid.
Yeah, man, I heard for you on that one, because the Rose Bowl to me is like an entry point into college football. It's the greatest game. It really helped build this sport. So wish we could have got to see you play in a Rose Bowl. So moving on a little bit to college football generally, it's my contention. It's our great folk sport. It's connected to our history and culture in ways no other game. Baseball, you could argue is there with it, but so let's put it there with baseball. But college football is connected in an extremely unique way. It's the land, its identity, its geography. It's passed down through families. It's just special in that way. So I guess what I want to ask you is did you love playing college football? I don't want to influence your answer, but I like to think you did love playing college football. And what were you, when you were playing, were you aware, this is great, I'm playing college football, this is really cool?
I never dreamed about anything but playing in a Rose Bowl. So many guys say, I had a dream of going to the league. I had a dream of going to the NFL, winning a Super Bowl. That was never me. My dream was always to play in the Rose Bowl. And those years playing college football at the time were truly the best in my life. I would say only surpassed by, getting married and the birth of my two kids. I mean, that time was magical. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. And I'm sure, obviously, the way that our seasons went and the way that my career went impacted or influenced how I feel and felt about it. But God, I mean, it was just, there's a connection that exists in college football, right? And I think going back to your point about baseball is why I would agree with you and argue that college football is truly more impactful than baseball, because there's a connection, right? Yeah. I always knew that if I went on and played in the NFL, that it would be different. It becomes a business, right? It becomes a commodity. People root for a professional football team or a professional baseball team because of their city, right? Because it's the closest team. Right. Not because of, you root for a college football team because you have a personal connection, right? You have a personal experience. You spent 4 years on campus. Your grandpa was a letterman. Your grandmother, was on the honor roll at the journalism school. Like there's a familial connection to college and college campuses. And it's an experience that is truly different than anything else that you can get in professional sports.
Right.
So I knew this was a small window, and I enjoyed it. Those years were truly some of the best years that I've ever had, and I knew how special it was while it was happening.
Yeah, I love to hear that, what you're talking about. And by the way, I threw baseball in there just for argument's sake, because, you have an opinion, someone has a counter opinion. So I threw baseball as inequivalent. If someone wants to come debate with me on Twitter, come bring it. We'll chat about which is which. One thing you were talking about right there to me is I often call college football the most personal game. It is much more than just a game. It is part of your identity. And when you go to certain schools, you can really sense that. I mean, these people are like, their college and their college team is like who they are in the world. And it means something to them in a way other things do. Good team, bad team, whatever team, that's your team. And you're never giving it up, and they're never moving away.
Yeah, that's very true. Absolutely. But I would go even a step further and say, nowhere in professional sports do you have walk-ons, right? Yeah. You have somebody. I mean, I think of my buddy who went to Sheldon High School in Eugene, grew up in Eugene, had family in Eugene, decided that he wanted to come walk on at the University of Oregon, and he was a good high school football player. I think he was maybe had a couple offers to go play small college ball, but he came and walked on at Oregon and truly spent 4 solid years on the scout team.
Yeah.
Just getting his teeth kicked in every day.
Right.
But he worked and he worked and he worked. And wouldn't you know, by our 5th year, by our senior year, he was playing on the defensive line. and his family was out there every weekend. Yeah. And he was going home and talking to mom and dad, and you could just, you could sense the pride. And he started at defensive tackle in the Fiesta Bowl, in the Fiesta Bowl for us. Yeah. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that you don't get in Major League Baseball. You don't get in the NFL. You don't get the stories of the guys who, hey, you know what? I'm just going to go try out for the Raiders. No, it doesn't work like that.
Right.
And I'm going to I was going to say a wholesomeness about college football, but I'm going to back off of that because of how money has begun to influence it. But I still think that there is a, help me think of the word. Well, maybe we'll come back to it, but there's a blank that exists in college football because of those opportunities that don't exist in professional sports.
Yeah, I think maybe a purity might be it, or a sincerity and earnestness. I don't know.
I like sincerity, because purity, I think money has influenced the game to the point where it's not as pure as it used to be. And, we all, we have stories, all know the stories of the SMUs who, maybe took the purity out of it at the time. But I like sincerity. I do. I like that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. We'll go with that for now. This is a perfect time to ask this question. So we're talking about college football, what it is, where it's going. When you look at it right now, NIL had to happen. Some equivalent of it had to happen because of, in my opinion, because of how much money had got to everyone else. At some point, the players had to be able to use their accomplishments to improve their own lives beyond just an education. Maybe if we don't go to billion-dollar contracts, we don't need an NIL. But at a certain point, when the coach is making $9 million a year and the player gets a scholarship and some free meals, it's probably not enough anymore. So I think it had to go there. But the other stuff, TV has, in my opinion, essentially bought up this sport. They're going to call the shots heading into the near future. We're going to get an expanded playoff. We're going to get a kind of, if not full Super Bowl feel, we're going to get a situation where if you're not playing for the playoff, maybe your season doesn't mean as much. Maybe the bowl game doesn't mean as much. So when you look at this era, I call it a revolutionary era in the next however many years. Do you think college football is headed a good direction? Are there positives and negatives? What do you see going forward in this game?
Wow. I think it's a mixed answer depending on what your perspective is, right?
Sure.
I will agree with you that TV and well, TV is the reason, is the reason that there are billion-dollar contracts out there. Yeah. Right? That's who's paying the conferences, the money for the rights to produce the games.
Right.
And that says something about the popularity of the sport. But I would completely agree that the athletes who are generating the money, the athletes who are putting the product on the field, need to be compensated with more than, a $726 scholarship check.
Right.
Again, people have asked me the question, like, what would a 10-story billboard across from Madison Square Garden have generated in terms of NIL? That was arguably the largest, we'll call it, media campaign. It was absolutely the biggest Heisman campaign, in terms of national visibility. For them to, and it hugely benefited me. I'm not gonna deny that.
Yeah.
But the number of jersey sales, right, for all these guys, the tickets, there are so many ways where players are used to market the program. And by marketing the program, they up the value, they up the visibility. And by upping the visibility, then the conferences can charge the TV companies more to broadcast their games. And where does that money go? That money goes to the university. That money goes to the athletic department. That money goes to pay the coaches, like you said, $9 million a year, who, by the way, can pick up and leave at any time.
Yeah.
Right. And that was always the thing was, and things are a little different now with the transfer portal, which I sort of get, but, don't quite fully understand how it all works.
Sure.
There isn't it, but what it does is it it highlights the inequity or the discrepancy between the university and the coaches and the players.
Right.
And nobody is saying, at least nobody that I've talked to, that these players need to get paid $1 million a year, right? It's not professional football.
Right.
It's moving towards that, or has already moved towards the direction where it is revenue generating and generating a significant amount of revenue. But they do need to be compensated for generating that revenue, because so many of the guys, like, your scholarship check is based on cost of living in your area. But so many of the guys that get the $726, check every month, you go out and you pay your rent, you pay your utilities, you pay, all your bills, and you're left with $26.
Right.
In your bank account at the end of the month, if that, right? There's so many stories about guys who would go out and play college football and put on this giant show for these thousands of people and millions of people in a television audience around the world, and everybody's making money, and they go back home and they're sitting there and eating ramen because that's the only thing they got in the fridge, right? They pull out ramen because it costs 99 cents down at the store.
Right.
And so there has to be some sort of give and take in that. And so I like the direction that college football has gone in terms of acknowledging that college football players need to have some sort of compensation.
Yeah.
As a purist, and your second part of the question was about the playoff and bowl games.
Right.
There was something about, when I was a freshman, so 94, 95 were the 95, 96 Rose Bowl Cotton Bowl for Oregon, right? And then I was recruited in 96 and I came in 97. Oregon didn't go to a bowl game in 96. I remember very distinctly our player operations guy coming in to the weight room, and we're all in there in our workouts after the Oregon State game and not quite sure what's going to happen. We finished, I think we were 6-5 at the time. That was the year, the Achilles Smith's first year.
Okay.
And Steve Hellier comes in. He was the player operations guy, and he stands up and he yells, "Hey boys, we're going to the Vegas Bowl." And you would have thought that they, it was free steak day. I mean, it was just the most giant explosion in the locker room. Like, yeah, and everybody was so excited because we got to continue playing.
Right.
I don't know that exists anymore in this system, right? And so I'll even go beyond that. So 99 was the Sun Bowl year for us. And the Sun Bowl at the time had such a fantastic tradition, right? It was always on New Year's Eve. This was my sophomore year, the first year I started playing. And it was an opportunity for us to play a Big Ten opponent, to lay that foundation, lay that groundwork for what we were trying to build the next two seasons. Right. In a game with some prestige, that had a tradition, that had a national audience. It was always CBS on New Year's Eve. El Paso did a great job of hosting, and I don't know if anybody really cares about that anymore, right? I don't know if, like you said, if you don't make it into the playoff, yeah, God, I guess we got to go to the Sun Bowl, right? I don't know if that, without being in the locker room and knowing how guys feel about that, from the outside looking in, it almost feels like kind of I guess we got to keep playing. Right.
Maybe next year.
Right. I don't know. It's an interesting question.
Yeah. It would be a loss for college football to lose that. To me, anything that makes college football less like what built it and more like the professional game is a loss to college football, a bigger loss. So, and basically what I mean by that is championship or bust. The bowl season was always special, and especially the kind of things you're talking about, 6-5 year, and you're not sure, but here it comes. You got a bowl invitation, and you get to keep playing, and you get to go to a cool spot and get a swag bag or whatever it is. But it's something. It was, again, back to sincerity. It was a sincerely appreciated thing that you got to go do. And if college football loses that, it's a loss to the sport. The sport is less.
And I think there's also something too as a fan. I mean, and this has changed already a little bit, but
Yeah.
I distinctly remember, as you know, we had our TV in the basement, right? And it sat on a little counter. And then we had a small little TV that was tucked in kind of like a den office, like on a shelf, you know, and on a back little table upstairs.
Sure.
And then we had this old black and white that was in the attic that, you know, like rabbit ears and
Right.
but on January 1st, every year we would bring all three of them down, right? You had
Yeah.
the TV and you bring the small TV over here, and then you had the tiny
Right.
one, and you had NBC, ABC, and CBS, and they all staggered the start times of their games. So one would start and the other would end, and then you kind of move, and this game would shift to the big TV in the middle, and then this one would turn a blowout, and so that goes to the black and white over there.
Right.
Those days as a college football fan, as a kid growing up, that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that, I don't know, there's something about January 1st that is very, I reminisce about, and I think we miss a little bit of that with the evolution of how things have turned into the playoff in college football.
Yeah, definitely. That January 1st, that's like my high holiday, exactly what you're talking about. The bowl games, the sunny weather, you know, up in the Midwest, it's winter, heading down to Florida and Texas and Southern Cal. I mean, you know, the in the Midwest, it's like 4:25 or something when or whatever time it is, the Rose Bowl kicks off, late afternoon. It's already getting dark in the Midwest. Cut to Pasadena, and as you mentioned, our big buddy Keith Jackson and the granddaddy of them all, and that Pasadena sunshine, man. It was a special thing. We'll wrap up here. We got to get to UW before we go. I believe you only played Washington twice, despite 3 years as a starter. Because
I actually only played him once. The first year, I only played him once. Okay. So I didn't start playing until about halfway through my sophomore year. So we played UW earlier in the year when AJ Feet was still our quarterback. And while I did travel, I was the backup quarterback and just the holder for PATs and field goals. So the only time I ever stepped foot on the field at Husky Stadium during a game was to hold for PATs.
Oh, okay. All right. That's good to know going forward. You know, for people who know this game, this is the big Pacific Northwest rivalry. The Civil War, the erstwhile Civil War is a fantastic game, but very regional, very local. Washington, Oregon is the big, especially when you talk about national implications after 94, especially this was it. So there's been a touch of controversy, if you want to call it that, in the last few days. I believe a phrase, academic prowess, was dropped somewhere. So I'll just ask you, is Washington Oregon's big rival, and is Oregon Washington's big rival?
Who are you talking about? No. Here's the interesting thing about the Oregon-Washington rivalry. If you use 94, the pick, as kind of the center point, as the turning point of this series, the 20 years prior to the pick, or the 20 games, I should say, because we actually lost Washington on the schedule in 01, which is what we were just talking about a second ago. I only got to play them once.
Right.
The 20 games prior to the pick, Washington was 17-3 against Oregon.
Right.
In the 20 games after the pick, Oregon was 16-4 against Washington.
Yeah.
And that dominance has continued. You know, call it 20 years prior to the pick, and since then, you know, we're at like 47 years. So let's round up for the better part of the last 50 years. It's been a one-sided rivalry. You know, the first side being Washington and the latest side being Oregon. Oregon had a stretch there where they won 12 straight. I mean, it wasn't even give me another rivalry where that has happened, right? Another rivalry in which two nationally prominent football programs have had that kind of disparity, right? That's the interesting thing I think about it. And I was lucky enough to grow up in that time of, let's call it 90 to 2000, that decade of where the tide started to turn.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing, and it's truly the pendulum has swung both ways in this, is that as an Oregonian, we wanted what they had. right? They were Don James, and they were, the national championship, granted a split national championship, I think in
91 with Miami. Yep.
91 with Miami. But, we always watched them. I had to watch them in the Rose Bowl every January 1st.
Yeah.
And we wanted what they had, right? And for so long, they wouldn't even acknowledge that we existed. And I'll say for good reason, because if you play 20 games and you win 17 of them, every once in a while, the little puppy bites at your heels, and that happens.
Right.
But then things shifted, and Kenny Wheaton intercepted Damon Heward, and the gangrene defense won it again the following year. And now you got a couple straight. And then Akili Smith and Pat Johnson go up to Seattle and knock them off in 97. And then Tui and, the 6th ranked Huskies come down to Autzen in 2000, and we beat them. And during that time, there was still this arrogance that was perceived on the part of Oregonians, that they still wouldn't acknowledge us, right? They still wouldn't acknowledge that, you know what? Not only are we beating you consistently now, but your program is falling. You lost Don James, you lost Jim Lambright, those days are gone. And now comes probation, and now comes the 0-12 season, of Ty Willingham, and we're taking off.
Yep.
And so there was this time when we as an Oregon program were saying, hey, we're here, we're searching for national prominence, and we're searching for recognition. And the team that we always were watching on New Year's Day, that we were very evidently catching up to and beginning to pass, they weren't even acknowledging that we existed. Right. And that's what created the bitterness, right? That was, and like I said, the pendulum has swung the other direction. We were 12 straight against Washington. And now we're to the point where some of those Oregon fans who don't know the lean years, who have only grown up, in the last 25 years where, I'm going to guess 25, 27 years where we've won, 19 of those games.
It's 19-6 in the last 25.
There you go. Yeah. That's all they know. Right. And so now Oregon, those young Oregon fans are developing this sense of, help me with the word, confidence, gentle.
Sure, there you go. That works.
Gentle confidence about this team that exists up north.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really interesting where for so long, Oregon and Washington have been the class, along with USC down south, but have been, at least in the discussion, in the class of the Pac-10, Pac-12, Pac-8 conference.
Right.
But very rarely have they actually been there at the same time. And it's created this huge disparity between the 20 years before the pick and the 25 years since, and you have this moment when Kenny Wheaton picked off Damon Heward on the 6-yard line and took it 94 yards up the sideline. And Jerry is screaming at the top of his lungs, and every Oregonian knows Kenny Wheaton's going to score. Kenny Wheaton's going to score. Kenny Wheaton, and that is the moment. I can rarely think of any other rivalries, and sure, there are great moments, whether it's, Alabama trying the long field goal and Auburn it back all the way. Like Darren Woods and Charles Woodson and the Michigan, Ohio State. Like there are great moments in all sorts of rivalries, but rarely can I think of one singular play in one singular game that truly is the fulcrum. Like that is the point. Yeah. That's it right there.
Yeah.
And at that moment, you have what existed before and what has existed since. Yeah. And I think that's really unique.
Oh, it's totally unique. It's totally fascinating. It is the seminal moment. It is the moment everything changed. It's and you talk about the Pac-12. If the Pac-12 is going to get back into this conversation as it should, they also need UCLA back in the fray. When you talk about pre-1998, you had USC, UCLA, Washington were essentially the trinity of Pac-10 teams who sort of held the line against the Big Ten. UCLA's faded away. Washington, we don't know what direction they're going right now. Oregon and USC, and now Oregon has been the program that has stood up to the rest of the country, taken on all comers, won some, lost some. But the Pac-12 to get back in this, which they need to. The college football is a better game when the West is competing with the rest of the country. It's just a lot more fun. Yeah, those teams need to get back in the fray.
Yeah.
That's
a nice way of saying it there. That's a really nice way of saying that the Pac-10 is outside of Oregon and occasionally USC. For the better part of the last 5 to 10 years, they've been kind of smelly.
Yeah, they have. They need to get it together. Hopefully the new commissioner gets it together with football. That rising tide in football lifts all ships. The Pac-12 wants to be great in Olympic sports, and that's wonderful. But guess what? Be great at football, and you'll get even better in Olympic sports. It's more money, more exposure, more everything. So, yeah. So Joey, I want to, if you have anything you're up to right now, I know you have a foundation. I know you're up to some things. If you want to tell people what you're doing or where they can find you, contact you, feel free to fire away here, and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. It's nice to be able to choose what I do with my time now. And I always knew that I wanted to, coach my kids and spend time with my family, but also give back to the community and the state that helped me get to where I am today. And so when I started the Harrington Family Foundation in 2002, I always knew that it would be what I would want to do for my career when I was done. But it wasn't until I really retired that it took shape. And the idea was, if people think of me, they're going to think of a quarterback being from Oregon, going away for a while, but coming back. And a quarterback is in a position of leadership. And so I came up with the idea of, I call them community quarterback scholarships, but they're leadership and financial need-based scholarships. And they're open to any graduating high school senior from any school in the state, so long as they continue their post-secondary education in the state of Oregon. And we give them a 4-year scholarship and connect them with mentors in their field to help open doors, to help share experience. Because I think we've all, I don't want to say, if you didn't know previously, I think the last year and a year or two has helped highlight the fact that not everybody is starting on the same level playing.
Sure.
And not everybody has the same doors that are opened to them. And so, and I think there's this entire group of incredible students that are overlooked because they don't get a 4-point, because they don't get a 4-point or a perfect SAT score. And, those students, they get their scholarship and they go back to the Ivy League schools and they get their internship on Wall Street and they push a pencil and they make $250,000 in a cubicle and, their life is great, fine. But then there's this gigantic group of students that maybe you got a 3.5, maybe you got a 3.3, maybe you just didn't like your high school English class, but you were hugely passionate about social studies and social justice and government. And that's what you want to do. We look for those students that have invested in their community, that have at a young age said, here's what I want to do. The students like Karen Espinoza, who noticed the disconnect between her Hispanic community in Woodburn, Salem area and law enforcement. So what'd she do? She joined the Salem Junior Cadets and every weekend worked with the police department to bridge that gap between law enforcement and her community. Maybe it's Julianne Robinson, who grew up in rural Lebanon, Oregon, who, frankly wanted to contribute with the Santiam Search and Rescue. And on the weekend, she worked with the search and rescue crews out in the Cascade Forest. There's different ways to volunteer and to make your community better, to invest, to show that you care.
Sure. And
those are the students that I want to find. Those are the students that I want shaping the direction of our state. Right? Those are the students where when I'm 75, I want to look and say, you know what? Policy in our state is being shaped by people who truly care and truly know what being an Oregonian is about. Yeah. Not somebody who could spout off Henry David Thoreau, or not somebody who knew, how to do trigonometry, or somebody who knew how to take a Scantron test.
Sure.
That doesn't resonate with me. What resonates with me is passion, is connection, is loyalty, right? And so if I can find students that have been overlooked by the normal scholarships,
Yeah.
and instead find the students that didn't quite fit the bill, but you know what, are perfect for what, are passionate and are perfect for what our program is, and that's who I'm looking for. If I can take those students and connect them with people who are already in their fields, so they can open doors and say, you know what, hey, I'm going to help you get your resume to the top of the pile. I'm going to help you with a connection here, because unfortunately, that's what life is about, right? That's how so many people get ahead, is by somebody opening a door and saying, I'm going to make an introduction for you.
Yeah.
And by teaming them with mentors who are already in so many different areas of our community, in so many different fields, I feel like I'm going to have I'm going to be able to help influence and help, I want to say influence the direction that our state goes, but help open doors for students for whom those doors might not already be open.
Yeah, I love that concept, and that's absolutely true. Who who can connect you and who can get you in the door and let you showcase your talents. It's massively important in life. And a lot of people who are extremely talented do not go through the standard process, and they're sometimes left behind simply because of lack of visibility. I know in my life, many of the best things that have happened for me have been places I've sent an email to 20 times, never heard back. I find someone who knows the guy who reads the emails. Next thing you know, my emails are being returned. I'm getting phone calls. Things are going well for me. So that kind of networking and that connection is a wonderful thing. So that concept is great. It's the Harrington Foundation. Is that right?
Harrington Family Foundation. Yeah. And that's a great way of putting it. That's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to build a network. We're trying to build a family. And the great thing is, we're 8 years into this program now, and the students who have graduated are now becoming resources for the current students, right? So every year we have this growing network of family members that is willing to help the next class of students coming in. And that's what, like you said, that's what this is about, is creating a network for these students to use as a resource.
That's a great thing. So that's the Harrington Family Foundation. I'll put a link in the bio for that, and I'll toss up a picture too. You guys can contribute if you can, or take a look at it, maybe get inspired by it, and you can do something like that in your own state, in your own life. So I know Joey's got to go. Joey's a busy guy. So this has been the inaugural Fifth Down Zoomcast. Will this be a thing going forward? Who knows? But I'm glad to have Joey Harrington on the first episode. So Joey, huge thank you for your time. We talked not only college football, we talked a little bit of life. So it was great to get this conversation with you, and deep gratitude for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, and good luck with your trip. It sounds like it sounds like a fun thing. I think I may have to join you at some point once I get off my crutches.
Hey, that sounds great. For college football traditionalists, this is it. This is the traditional journey through all the classic rivalries. So I have no doubt you'd love it. So thank you, Joey. And guys, we'll be Fifth Down, as I'm always around. You know where to find me. Social media. All right, guys, take care.